And welcome back. As you remember from the last video, we got our intake removed off our motor, and we talked about removing the radiator next, which is what we're working on now. I went ahead and just disconnected the lower radiator hose and bent it down towards our bucket that you see there, just to help drain out any residual coolant that was still in that lower hose. And there will be some. The radiator is not going to get all of it, because that lower radiator hose is actually one of your lower points in the system. So just be mindful that when you break that loose, it will drain out a bit. And one comment I forgot to make on these, I don't know what year they started doing this, or if Dodge has always done this, or I should say Chrysler's always done this, but on these hose clamps, you'll notice that even when you loosen them up, you can't back them up all the way, and they're actually physically bonded to a portion or to a section of the hose. I don't know if it's just done for efficiency of assembling at the plant, or if they just do that to make sure that you're getting the clamps in the right spot. But you'll notice when you squeeze that quick clamp together, that you can't pull it all the way back on the hose like you can a typical quick clamp. So just be mindful of that. When you clip it together to release it, it's kind of want to stay right where it would normally stay when it clamps down. So just kind of put your, and what we use is just a pair of long nose vice grips, and clip it on. If you can see my vice grips here, you're squeezing that side of the clamp and that side of the clamp together, and this clamp will kind of want to stay where it's at. But when you get those two pieces clamped together, then it will allow you to move the end of the hose off of the fitting that it's on. So just be mindful of that so it doesn't catch you off guard. Let's see, what we're going to do next is that lower piece, you'll see, goes into our water pump. We're going to go ahead and continue to work to get that off. That lower piece has two fittings that kind of come off of it. One fitting, you'll see that center piece there has two hoses in the center of it. One piece comes up, converts over to a piece of aluminum pipe you see here, goes in the bottom of the coolant reservoir, and the other hose, it's kind of hard to see. Let's see if I can get a light down in there, maybe make it a little bit better for you. It's right here at the tip of the, see the light here, it's right here at the tip of the light. Kind of bends off and goes this direction, and it looks like it goes into, I think that is part of the, I don't know if that's I believe that's an oil cooler, but don't quote me on that, because it looks like it's part of the oil filter housing. But they tee it off of there, and the other half of this little housing down here comes off to another coolant pipe, runs up, the end converts over to aluminum, and comes out of what you see for the firewall there, which goes to the heater core. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the clamps loose on the center piece. I'm going to take this piece out of here, just disconnect it from the bottom of the water reservoir, and of course your overflow line, or what we used to call an overflow line in older vehicles, which kind of comes into the top of your radiator. And that will allow us to remove this double section piece of aluminum pipe. Again, free up some room, and then it will allow us to get this whole lower radiator hose out of here, and then we'll work on, at that point, of getting the actual radiator itself out. And we will work on getting the two pieces of metal pipe that you see here that's kind of in a bracket, or I should say 3 pieces of metal pipe here. One of these goes to the other side of the two smaller ends that go to your coolant reservoir. The other 2 are the metal pipes that convert back to rubber before it goes to your heater core. But you'll notice it's right here on this valve cover, and since we have to take this head off, and I know these deal with coolant, all 3, I'm going to see if I can just disconnect all these hoses and get this piece out of here. Again, we're just looking at trying to get as much stuff out of the way as we can, free up some working space, so when we get ready to take this head off, we're not fighting all of this plumbing, which most of this is coolant. Now you've got some AC lines, like this is an AC line here that runs this direction. Obviously we're not gonna undo this AC line because we're not prepared to evacuate the AC system, nor let alone charge it. So we'll just have to see when it comes time to pull this head off, of just kind of working around this AC line, or maybe trying to kind of push it up off to the side. Since we've got this front bracket out, it's a bit more flexible, but in the other mindset, we need to be careful how much we're flexing that, because we obviously don't want to damage that to where we cause a problem with the AC system, because that would mean this would have to be replaced. You'd have to purge the AC system, recharge it, yada yada yada, and it's not something that we really want to get into. But like I said, we'll remove as much of this cooling hoses as we can just to make some working space, and we'll bring you back as we get more pieces of this out. Talk to you in a bit. And just wanted to show you this real quick. We're working on getting this lower piece out of here we talked about earlier, and at least on this particular 2016, and maybe they're all this way, but these two hoses we discovered, as you see in the centerpiece here, are actually got these permanent clamps on them. They don't feel like they're clamps that you can actually squeeze together and remove. And we'll get a better visual on it when we can actually get this piece out of here. But there is a clamp there, however. You can see where this one hose goes into. Let me move the light out of your way so it's not blinding you and washing out the camera. But you can see this hose right here. You can see that clamp, which attaches to one of the two hoses in this centerpiece. So in order to get this out, we're going to have to undo the hose from this housing here. So what I'm going to do is, you can see that we took the bottom hose off the water pump in order to gain access to that clamp, so we can take that off. I just want to let you know that unlike some of the radiator hoses, at least on this one, this particular clamp here wasn't bound to the hose to stay in one spot. So we were able to loosen this one and push it down, as you can see. Now be mindful that when you do this, that these hoses, they've been heat cycled, they've been stuck where they're at for a while. Even with this clamp off, this one was a little bit difficult to remove. In order to break that seal that it forms, I've seen some use a pick. I just use a little pocket screwdriver and kind of worked it around the edge of this hose, being mindful not to pierce it. And you can kind of, you could hear it kind of crack that seal loose. And then eventually, when I was able to kind of work my gloved fingers around the edge of it, just kind of went around the edge of it until I could hear more of it crack loose, until it loosened up to the point that you could lightly wiggle it. And then I got it right off that. So what we're going to do next, we're going to remove that fitting right there, and we're going to continue to get this piece out of here. Since that other hose, since both those hoses in the center look like they're permanently clamped in place, that second hose runs to that fitting right there, which then becomes a piece of metal pipe and goes to the bottom of that reservoir. So what we're going to do in this case is we're just going to undo that clamp there, and that clamp for that hose and that clamp for that hose, and that should allow us to take this center piece out. And when we get that piece out, we'll bring it back. Just want to bring it back here and kind of show you what we're doing. We've got that hose disconnected. We're getting ready to pull this center piece out. And what I'm going to do is just disconnect the lines, the two lines we need from here, from our coolant tank. I should say coolant reservoir, and then the one line going to the upper radiator that you see here. And then what it will allow us to do is kind of take that out in one big piece. Now, if you're breaking these hoses loose and you're having a little bit of trouble, the smaller ones, if you've got, a decent assortment of these hose pliers, breaking them loose, it's a lot easier of a job. Now, the bigger ones, obviously, unless you got a massive set of hose pliers, we found it was easier, like we said earlier, just to use a small pocket screwdriver and kind of break that seal loose. And then once you can get the entire hose to kind of start twisting a little bit, you can get them off. But for these smaller ones, and even for this bottom one of the coolant tank, what I find is that if you take your hose pliers, once you pull your clamp down, if you clamp below, like what I'm doing right here, and I'll bring a light in here to show you, and hopefully that shows up okay. See, I'm below the little nipple on the coolant reservoir that clamp would normally go on. So you can see we've got the clamp off, we've got it pushed down, and if I grab these hose pliers here and kind of, you notice I can squeeze it. So I'm squeezing on a section of the hose that below anything below that nipple that's inside that hose that clamp would go on. So I can squeeze just the hose itself. If you give the hose a little bit of squeeze and then rock it, you'll see that I can now rock that hose from side to side, breaking that seal loose, and you can see it's starting to come off at that point. So these pliers, and I'll be honest with you, this is just an inexpensive set that I picked up at Harbor Freight, and so far they're doing an awesome job for breaking these hose seals loose. And even after just 3 years of these being in place, and I'll show you this, I'm going to squeeze this clamp and back this clamp off, get it out of my way. But you can see that one's not too bad because it literally just slid right off in my hand. But some of these, especially when it comes to a metal fitting, they kind of get seized in place a lot. And that's when you can kind of take these hose pliers here, again, grip below or slightly on where they would normally affix, just get them to rock back and forth, and then generally you can get them right off at that point without doing any damage to the hose itself. And again, these are just an inexpensive set that I got from Harbor Freight, but they're doing a job. I'm sorry, these weren't Harbor Freight, these were actually Northern Tool, but they're doing the job quite nicely. But now that we've got all of our hose points loose, I'm going to get that assembly out of there, and we'll bring it back and show you what it looks like. And as you can see, we got our prize. We were able to get this out as one big assembly. You have to fight with the PCM wiring harness a little bit to get it out of there, but it can be done. I'll show you that in a second. And a correction on this lower radiator hose, this clamp actually isn't bonded in one location. You can loosen this up enough to slide it back. Now the upper radiator hose, at least when we put the Pro Charger in, the Pro Charger for the upper radiator hose, you had to cut 1 inch off the hose and shorten it up to get it off of and away from the supercharger, and I'll show you that when we do the reassembly. So I ordered a new hose in order to do that, so in case something went wrong, I had a spare. And when I ordered the new hose from the parts counter, the new hose came in, and right about there where you have that flat section of solid clamp is where it was bonded to a section of the upper hose where it clamped onto the radiator. So I actually had to break that little bond, get the clamp out of the way so I can cut 1 inch off the hose and put the clamp back on. But correction for what I said earlier, at least on this one, the bottom one is not fixed. This was the part that goes into the lower section of the water pump. This was a feeder tube that went into that spout you saw right next to the oil filter. And coming up here, this was the line that goes into the upper part of the radiator. This was the line that went to the lower part of the reservoir. And this was the line that went to the upper part of the reservoir, more importantly, the upper left-hand part of the reservoir. So that hose here went here, closest to the fill cap. And with that out, that gets us our one piece, and that we've got that out of the way. You can see that we've freed up a lot more room. We've got some piping out of our way, so when we get that head out, it'll hopefully be a little bit easier on us. But we will work on getting, like I said earlier, these three, pardon, dropping the light, these three lines you see here, out of here, and that'll allow us to remove that whole bracket. And looks like it's actually affixed to part of the head anyway, so we have to kind of take this off anyway, but it'd be nice to get it out of here. And I may take it a step further and go ahead and get the coolant reservoir out of here again, because it'll free up room for us to hopefully be able to stand, if not sit in here, to help remove that head. And let's see what else we got. So the next thing will be that we will concentrate on getting the radiator in here. Never mind the light from earlier, I'll pick it up. It's a shop light. If you've done automotive work before, you know that the shop light will tend to want to go in places it shouldn't, and you'll probably drop it about 1,000,000 times in its lifespan. So again, nothing to be worried about. But we're going to crack on, and once we get that radiator out, we'll bring it back. Thank you. And welcome back. In the last section of this video, we removed the lower radiator hose. And I should say hose assembly, because if you remember, if we took it off, it was a lower radiator hose that had a T in it that teed off to a couple of pieces, one to a fitting that came out of the oil filter housing, and another one that went to the overflow bottle, and to some, and also to the top of the overflow canister. But in this video, next section of this video, I should say, we're going to concentrate on getting this radiator out of here. And there are a lot of plumbing, as you can see, on the passenger side of this radiator. And what it is, it's just a lot of brackets and a lot of hold downs holding on to various pipes that go into various coolers, as well as the air conditioning condenser that go in the front of the main radiator you can see here. So you can see that you've got a cooler there, radiator slash cooler there. You've got another one here, and finally the main radiator itself. Now this middle one here, just by following the lines, this one's going to be your AC condenser. And the two that are left over, I believe one's going to be your oil cooler, at least for a 2500 it should be an oil cooler, and the other one's going to be a transmission cooler, if I remember correctly, or if I understand correctly, and of course your main radiator. But to start things off, and hoping I can get the camera down in there so you can see it. See that bolt right there on that clamp holding those first two lines in. We're going to take that bolt out to get that clamp off, and then around the front of the radiator, starting from the top here, you've got a bolt here holding this one in place to the side of the radiator. You've got one here as well as one here, and if we look actually inward towards, and hopefully you can see it there. You can kind of see that bolt just peeking out a little bit, but it looks like, oh, let me get a light in here. It might be a bit easier to see it then. And there it is. Let's see. You can kind of see where I'm got this panel removal tool. It's right here. There we go. That should give you a nice shot of it there. Let me get the light out of the way so it stops blinding you. There we go. And that other bolt again is right there, right where that panel removal tool is. So you've got, looks to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, counting the one in there, to remove all the various hold downs and or retaining clips or straps, so to speak. And then from my understanding, you can kind of see this from this top one here, that this end of it, they're just slotted in. So once we get all these mechanics loose on this side, we should have enough play in it that we can push the radiator out, slide it this way, slide it towards the passenger side, and be able to get this out in one piece, or at least that's the plan. So I'm going to work on getting these bolts out of here and getting all this hardware loose, and then we'll bring you back when we attempt to pull this thing out. And welcome back. Just want to show you that we've got our bolts removed, as well as we've got our main bolts on the top here loosened up, and you can see that everything's kind of very loose and very floppy. It does look like it is ready to come out of here at this point. But just to also show you that what we were dealing with there on the side was that what you had were, these were the support bolts that were bolting in various other plumbing that went to those other coolers. And you've got 4 of these that ran across the front, actually 5 in total, that were mounting on various bits of hardware there on the passenger side. And I'll bring you back to it. But what you were looking at was that these are 12 millimeter, these slightly bigger ones, and they're all the same bolt going down. You had 2 smaller 10 millimeters. One of these was the very first bolt I showed you at the beginning that was kind of nestled down on the inside going this direction. The other one was the one that was nestled in the front of the radiator going this way. But I mean, you'll obviously see them. But you had 4 12s and 2 of these 10s. And then the bolts that were these big guys here, they've got your rubber isolators on them that go into the side of your radiator. I went ahead and just took this off from the other side. These are 13 millimeter, if I remember correctly. Let's just look at our socket here. And yes, those are 13s. So you're dealing with a 10, a 12, and a 13 to get all the bolts necessary to loosen up the radiator. This came out of the driver's side. It looks like it's going to be easier to remove these. These do slide out of the brackets that they're on the side, like you'll see this one here. Passenger side, it's loosened up. All the hardware is loose. I'm just going to take this and kind of rotate it a little bit, and then once we get that seal broken, I can just kind of continue to push this. There it goes. And you can see we can kind of get this out of here because this bolt is captive, or at least for when it looks like it's captive. It won't come out of this holder. So it'll be a little easier if we just continue to kind of twist that like that, get that rubber mount out of there, and then that way we don't have this big long bolt sticking, kind of hitting on stuff, getting in our way. But like I said, that's pretty much it as far as the hardware. So you got 5, 6, 7, looks like 7 bolts total to get this out of here. You can see that all of our other coolers, and as well as the condenser, is now loose. Now be careful at this point because, you know, we have taken off all the support for this excess plumbing here on the side, so there's not really much holding it, you know, so just be careful you don't over tweak one of these other lines. But we're going to continue on with kind of pushing this radiator forward and seeing if there's any more hardware that we need to take off to get this radiator out of here. And if we do, we'll let you know about it when we bring you back. I want to bring back and show you this and show you that the radiator is ready to come out. You can see it's been separated at this point. Now you kind of have to play with things a little bit when you get it loosened up. It doesn't take much, but the bottom of the radiator just sits down inside it. You can see my fingers here that sits down inside some circular indentations where some rubber grommets will go into. I just picked up on the radiator slightly to disengage it from this side and pushed it free of all the plumbing you have here. Now be careful when you do this because at least on this one you can see that there's a sensor here that's going into our AC line, so we want to make sure that we don't snag the wiring or hit that on the way out. But it looks like all we have to do is lift up on the passenger side there and we'll be able to have this out. But I wanted to bring this back and kind of show this to you, and we'll bring you back when we finally have our prize out of here. And welcome back. As you can see, we've got our prize. We've got our radiator out. What I found easy enough to do was to lift up on the passenger side there, get it out of that grommet, push it forward slightly, and then pull it towards the passenger side. to get these, which are just slotted in place on the previous side, to kind of slide out of the areas in the radiator that are holding it. And I'll show you that here in a second. Once that was done, these kind of fell down a little bit, so be mindful that they're kind of free floating at this point. I did tie wrap this one to this one. This one seems to do a pretty good job of kind of resting in place and not moving. This is our air conditioning condenser, so I just want to put a tie wrap on there just to kind of keep this one from falling forward and kind of free flapping around. And I don't want it to damage those air conditioning fittings down on that end, because the goal of this is to not crack open the air conditioning system to do all this. I don't have the facilities to recover it here. I just don't want to deal with that in general. So we've got a radiator out. The next step will be is to see if we can get one more hose assembly, pardon the noise, one more hose assembly on the passenger side out of here, and that's the hose assembly that goes to the block heater through the firewall. As you can see, it's right down there. It's a bundle, transitions between rubber hosing and aluminum pipes. There's 3 of them, and you can see they kind of go right on the front of that head. So if we can get that little group of pipes out of the way, it gives us just that much more room to hopefully get the head off easier on this side. And I won't take that off. That'll be in another video. I'll more than likely include that when we get to the point of breaking these heads down. You'll see it at that point. But for this one, the goal was to get the radiator out of here, get that lower hose assembly out of here, free up some more space to work with. And I'll take you in the back here and show you that we do have our prize and part storage at this point. And you can kind of see it sitting right there, just leaning back a little bit, make sure it doesn't continue to drip on us. This is what, again, you saw this in the previous clip. This is what they consider the lower radiator hose, which when you go to order this, when you go to order a lower radiator hose, it doesn't just come, at least on this model, as this piece or this piece. It comes as this piece. So everything from this rubber hose down, so you get these 2 rubber hoses, this T, and these 2 fittings. This is considered an assembly. These 2 aluminum pipes with the 3 rubber ends on them, when they transition back to rubber hose, this is considered a, I believe they called it the coolant bottle or coolant reservoir to radiator assembly. And I think this one's about $150–160 for that assembly. This assembly, and I did go ahead and order a new one. I didn't. I may replace this. I'm not sure, and I will explain the reason why I'm going to replace it. I may potentially replace this in an upcoming video, but when I explain that, you'll understand. I did look at the cost of this one. I want to say this one was about $50–60, which, you know, to be honest with you, to me wasn't a bad deal for a dealer part, or I should say a factory part, because it came with this piece, the center piece, this piece, and these 2 hoses. Literally, from this point down, these 2 hoses, this fitting, and these 2, all the clamps and everything comes as one complete assembly for, at least on this model truck, I want to say it was right at $50–60. It actually wasn't a bad deal. It kind of surprised me. But enough of rambling. You can see that we've got a radiator out at this point in time, and we'll continue to take the tear down piece by piece. And just like I've heard other people tell me, it's just like eating an elephant. You're going to take it one bite at a time. And as we do these pieces, we'll bring you along for the ride. Other than that, that will end this section of the video. And we'll pick up the next video with continuing to tear down what we can and see about trying to get those heads off next. Which will be eventful, because there's not as much room, it looks like, on the driver's side as there is the passenger side to do it. Per the book, they say that you don't have to remove the exhaust headers. You can just decouple them from underneath and pull it out as one unit. As you can see on the passenger side, That looks like that may be possible. On the driver's side, it looks like that's going to be a chore to try to get that head out of there in one piece, especially with this air conditioning line just happened to be run the way they ran it, all the way across here and kind of right on the top of the corner of that head. So that'll be fun to deal with. But we'll tackle it. We'll bring you along for the ride, and hopefully these tips will help you. And we'll talk to you later. Bye.